Welcome to Creative Piecemeal Podcast, a podcast for creatives. I'm your host, Tammy Takeishi. Join me for compelling conversations with artists, actors, authors, musicians, and other creatives about the impact of the creative and fine arts in their lives and our ever-changing world. Thank you for listening. Hello, and welcome to Creative Piecemeal Podcast. Today, I am joined by John Lawrence Jack Canfora. He's an award-winning American playwright, actor, musician, and teacher. After receiving his dramatic training at the London Academy of Music and Dramatic Art, he began his career as an actor in regional theater, working mostly in Shakespearean roles such as Mercutio and Macbeth. He's been hailed by the Associated Press as white-hot entertainment for his off-Broadway plays, including Poetic License, Place Setting, and Jericho, a New York Times Critics' Pick. He was nominated along with Edward Albee, Elaine May, and Teresa Rebeck for the Newark Star Ledger's Best Play 2007. He's also the recipient of 2 Edgerton Playwriting Awards for Jericho and The Source, and in 2016 won the Webby Award for Best Writing in a Web Series. Jack is also the artistic director of New Normal Repertory Theater. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me on. Happy to be here.
I don't have too many playwrights on the show, so I'm excited to have this artistic, creative side on the show and, let people know what a wonderful career this can be. And I'm curious, what led you to becoming who you are today?
Yeah, I mean, it's not a surprise that you haven't had that many playwrights on, because playwrights are, it's an interesting choice in America to decide to become a playwright. It's sort of like growing up in the Congo and deciding you want to be a downhill alpine skier. And so it's not a culture that has a lot of oxygen for plays. I came into it because I started off as an actor. And I'd always wanted to be a writer of some form or fashion all my life. And so when I started writing really sketch comedy, and then that morphed into playwriting because it felt realistic to me, attainable. I'd been in a bunch of plays, and so sort of the sense of an architect, the architecture of it, the nuts and bolts of it, I've sort of absorbed through sort of osmosis. And so, whereas writing a novel would have been a completely brand new, adventure for me, I felt I was more equipped to write plays than anything else. So it was a question of figuring out what fits me best, and it was playwriting.
What is one of your favorite parts about the writing process?
Well, playwriting to me is sort of a nice mix, because I am, like a lot of writers, I can be very solitary and sort of like my alone time. But I also really I love being in a room with other people and creating stuff. And so it's really the best of both worlds in that sense. To me, it's when I'm writing a play that's when I'm in it. The whole part of it I love, even when the days are, and there are many days when I'm sitting at my laptop and it's just mediocre at best, and I'm hitting wall after wall. And the annoying thing about writing on a laptop is it's connected to every possible distraction in the universe. And so, I could be glib and say my favorite part about writing is napping, which is, definitely part of it. But eventually, when you tap into a vein of something that you think is going to that works, and then it becomes a little bit, it's not really controlled by you, at least in the initial draft. You go back and then you've moderated to what you want. But when it's going well, it's not a very intellectual process. It's a very sort of intuitive process, and those are the moments that I think are the best. And for me, anyway, I have to be aware of the fact that I have to sit in front of the keyboard, for 9 days, writing hopefully okay, workmanlike stuff, hoping that on the 10th day there'll be something really worth keeping.
And you've had, a lot of success with your plays, and you also teach, and you're the artistic director of the New Normal Rep. So, you're passing on your wisdom, and you're helping other people live their dreams doing through acting and art. But the New Normal Rep is something different. It's an online theater company. Would you mind telling the listeners a little more about that?
No, I'd love to. It started really because of the pandemic. When the pandemic hit, I reached out to friends of mine, actors mostly, and said, why don't we just get together and Zoom every week and read a play? And it can be whatever anyone wants, and anyone can play whatever they want. And really, it was in part a way to sort of keep those muscles from atrophying too much. But really, it was just an excuse to see people I liked and to have a good time. And then really, after about 6 months of it, we realized that we had the makings of a really strong ensemble of actors, and online readings of plays were really just in their infancy in those days. And they were either, I think, plays that were being that had been recorded on the stage and they're just being shown, or readings where people are, just reading the play sitting, in front of a music stand. And we felt there's got to be a way of making that a little bit better, making it a more theatrical experience. It's not going to be the same thing as going to a play, obviously, but we wanted to find, for lack of a less pompous word, an aesthetic that would suit the medium, because I think we're all aware of the constrictions of the medium, but I think that there are some advantages to it as well. And we found out, I think that we realized there's a sort of intimacy to it if you do it right, and I think we worked hard to get that. And then we put together, a season of, our first season was 4 full plays. One of them was mine. 3 of the others were by other great writers, including Nilo Cruz, who won a Pulitzer for Anna in the Tropics, and Daphne Rubin Vega, and Jimmy Smits were in it. And so he had a lot of people drawn to it, which is really nice. Oye Tempo is a great director. She directed a great play by Nicole Salter, very promising, talented playwright, who was also nominated for a Pulitzer, I think. And so we were very happy with the quality of the material we put out. We really trying to make it a diverse group, and I think we succeeded in that, and we're proud of that, and we're very proud of the work we put out. We think that there's a place for this, because we don't for a second think it is theater. It's going to replace theater. We have no interest in replacing theater. I, for one, would love to get back and have a play of mine in the theater. And but what it does is it democratizes the process a bit. I mean, to me, I was saying earlier that there's just not much oxygen in the culture for theater, for plays. And when they do, it's musicals, which are great, but they're not plays. And I think the 2 big impediments to that, because it's not on anyone's radar, the 2 big impediments to that are geography. And you have to be lucky enough to live near a really good professional theater company. And they do exist throughout the country, but it's not chock-a-block with them. And in finance, the prices become very prohibitive, especially in New York. And so what we really set out to do, part of our mission statement, is to democratize it. And so now it's a unique opportunity in history where we can produce something that is not television and not film. It's got its own aesthetic. It privileges language more, like theater tends to do. It can be seen for very little money. If you're struggling, or a theater or an artist, and I think the most we charge is $20, and if you had trouble with that, we would work with you. We really just wanted you to get the chance to see it, and you can see it anywhere in the world. And so we're very excited about that. And so we don't think it's going to go away. And again, it would be a very depressing thought if we thought, well, theater is going to go away and this is the only thing that's going to replace it. That would be very depressing. But I think it's a great supplement to it, and I think it will open up, hopefully. I mean, we're not the only ones doing it, but it will open up a larger audience to understand what the theatrical experience is like.
Are you allowed to talk about any of your current and upcoming projects?
Our current project that we have out online, it's on podcast platforms. We did a radio play. It's called Step 9, and it's available on any major, and I think even several minor podcast platforms. All you'd have to do is in the search bar type New Normal Rep and Step 9, the number of 9. And it's an 8-part drama that we're very proud of. And it's done as a radio play. And we're very, that was fun too. And it was a really great experience. And we're very happy with how it came out. And we really would love people to see it. And it's absolutely free. It's completely free. And which is really what we wanted. We just wanted to expose people to our work, and we're very happy with that. Right now, that's what we're focusing on. Right now, we're sort of like regrouping and trying to write some grant applications and things like that. We'd love to come up with a couple of new plays soon, but that depends a lot on how the grant applications go. Personally, I have a couple of plays, one of which we're trying to put together a reading for producers in the fall. And a friend of mine and I have just tried to come up with something in a podcast form, because true crime podcasts are this like phenomenon in the country, and there aren't really many parodies of it. And so my friend and I wrote a pretty what we hope, and it seems to be considered a pretty funny comedy, which is basically a parody of it. It's a true crime podcast about a completely untrue crime, and it's called The Murderer Killings. So we're very happy with that. We're producing that right now, and we're hoping to get a platform to launch it from in the not too distant future. So and that for me was a lot of fun, because writing just a flat out silly comedy was such a relief, because step 9 is very heavy. It's about a woman who was raped in her college years, and she's really didn't get justice, as is too often the case, and she tried to move on with her life as best she could and compartmentalize it. And it's based on a true story, by the way, and the premises anyway. And she about 30 years later, she gets a letter from her rapist apologizing to her because he is in recovery, and one of the steps is making amends. And of course, you're not supposed to reach out to the person if making amends with them will traumatize them, but he, I guess, didn't think that through. And so now all of a sudden she's confronted with the fact that she now has evidence that he raped her. He admits it, and there's no statute of limitations. And so she has to wrestle with what she considers and what her family considers a moral obligation to pursue justice. And that's certainly something she wants to do anyway, but also she has to wrestle with, do I want to relive this? Do I want to go through this again? And so I think we're very proud of the play. And there are some, and again, it's not all doom and gloom. I mean, there's a lot of funny parts too, and it's very hopefully entertaining, but it's got a very serious, weighty undertow to it. So to write something that's just silly was really a great palate cleanser for me.
I think that's fantastic that you have the range to do things such as comedy sketches like are on your YouTube channel, as well as things with more gravitas like step 9 and bringing important subjects to light, but in a manner that is more digestible, I guess, to the mass audiences.
I hope so. Yeah, I hope so. I mean, like I said, I started out writing sketch comedy, so I knew I could write comedy. And by the way, I didn't have any formal training, but that was the best training in the world, because we had a show in the Village every Friday night, and every 2 weeks we came up with an hour's worth of material, and we just threw it up there on the stage, and you knew when it worked and you knew when it didn't work. And that was audience is the best teachers. And so you figure out what you can do and what you need to work on. And so from there, I just started writing more plays, see if I could write plays. And inevitably, the subject matters that interested me were sort of heavier ones. And I think my plays have been described as, very funny. And then you realize at the end, oh my God, there's something really, they're talking about really heavy things. But I like to play. I love plays that are deeply dramatic, but very funny throughout, because that's, to me, a little bit more realistic about life. Edward Albee is a huge influence on me. I'm a huge fan. And so like something like Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, which is gut wrenching, but it's laugh out loud funny on almost every page. And so to me, that's like a perfect play that if it can do that.
Yeah, it reminds me a little bit of the TV show Louder Milk. Are you familiar with that one?
No, I've heard good things about it though, so I should check it out, right?
Yeah. It's a bit of an intense drama, and it's about this person who coaches and leads AA meetings, and there are some intense things, but it's very sarcastic and witty, and it takes a very talented person such as yourself to write things like that, where it's heavier subject matter, but wrapped up with little nuggets of comedy and wit sprinkled in.
Well, I mean, I think it's just a question of like trying my best to whatever extent I can to try and be to approach a situation is, as authentically. How would I respond? And my friends would often respond, even in very dark news, with humor. I mean, as it's really it's a sort of transparent defense system, really. And I think, I mean, there have been jokes in my plays that I thought, oh, these are good jokes, but we've cut them because they don't really do anything for the play. The jokes should, I think, in that sort of play, and I don't want to be prescriptive. I mean, it's not like I know all the answers, but in that sort of play, for me, all the jokes should be very funny, but they should also tell you something. Come from a place of usually unconsciously revealing your weaknesses, even though you're trying to do the exact opposite. It often backfires.
I'd love to talk a little bit more about your creative process and your writing process. I know we talked about some of your favorite things, but what are some things that drive you absolutely bonkers about the writing process, and how do you get over those?
Well, for me, the big problem for me is when I'm finished writing something, and when I say finished, I mean, I forget who said it, but there's that great line that plays, and it's probably true of all writing, plays aren't finished, they're abandoned. At a certain point, you just sort of say, I have to go on and get a, drink of water, and then, move on and try and start the next one. For me, the big obstacle is always finding something to write about. I went through the pandemic in a very obviously, my mind was obviously trying desperately to occupy myself. And so I wrote, I'm not saying these were all great works, but I'm saying I wrote an incredible amount of material. I wrote several plays. I wrote a screenplay. I wrote a pilot. I was just constantly writing, and the ideas were coming one after the other. And I knew why that was, but I was very happy. It's like you tune into a radio station. I don't know if people do that anymore, but I mean, when I was back in my day, when you turn the dial and like you'd get it, oh, just right, and you just want to keep it there. So if the radio station comes in, you take it. And having said that, right after, the worst days of the pandemic, I didn't have anything to write for a long time. It was like a year and a half before I even had an inkling of what to write. And for the first year, I didn't have a problem with that. I thought, I really need to recharge the batteries, and that's okay. But around 18 months, I was starting to get a little itchy and thought, why can't I think of anything? And inevitably, when I think of something to write, it doesn't really land with me. It has to sort of like hit me in the gut or on the skin. I have to feel a little like, and think, oh, that's interesting. And I don't even know why it's interesting, but I think that's an interesting story. To me, it's like a little bit like a poem, and I'm one of North America's five worst poets. So I'm very envious of poets. But for me, when I read a poem, if it really moves me, and I think it's really good, it moves me in a way that I couldn't begin to explain to you why and then I can like start to unpack it and think, oh, I think this is why, because it's speaking to me about this. But it's got to be a visceral reaction having almost nothing to do with my brain. And I think when I feel an idea for a play, that's what it's like. And then once I've got that, I got to tell you, I love it. Even the days that are where you get nothing done and the days where you get stuck, I knock on wood, I tend not to suffer from writer's block if I have a sense of where I know where I'm going. I can always write down, but then I will come apart. For example, a play I wrote called Fellow Travelers, which was done a few years ago. It was my first attempt at writing characters who were historical figures, Arthur Miller and Marilyn Monroe and Elia Kazan in this case. And so I did a lot of research, and I loved the research. And then I realized at a certain point, the research was an excuse not to write. So I started writing it, and I wrote that play in 6 weeks until the last scene. And I had no idea. I vaguely knew what I sort of kind of maybe hoped the last scene would do, but I said, I have no idea what that last scene is. And so I'd written everything. I started in early November. I'd finish it by midway through January and said, okay, good. I get just the last scene. I'll be done soon. April rolls around and I still haven't thought of it. And I tried not to worry about it. I tried sort of the old Charlie Chaplin approach, where you just meticulously sweat every detail. And then I tried the Buster Keaton approach, whereas apparently when he would get stuck creatively, he would take a break and he would take the crew out and they'd play baseball. And in the middle of and throughout the baseball game, he would come up with an idea. I tried both those things metaphorically and was getting nowhere. So starting to get a little panicky. And for me, that is writer's block in a sense, of course. But it wasn't that like, I know what to write, I just can't write it. It's like, what the heck do I write? For me, the thing that I find that usually gets me out of it, and it took me a while this time, but I sort of discovered it here, is that what I will do is, and I will write in a journal in sort of an essay approach, saying like I'm recounting the plot and saying, okay, what would I like to happen next, and what would this person want, and usually then it shakes some of the cobwebs out and I can get down and write it. And when I figured out what the scene had to be, I wrote the scene in 2 hours. So, but it really wasn't 2 hours. It was really 4 months and 2 hours, you know? So, I guess what I don't like is when I don't have anything to write. And I'm not one of these writers who has notebooks full of ideas. For me, every time I finish a play, part of me thinks, maybe that's the last play I can ever write. Maybe that's the last one I'll ever do, because it's not like building a chair, right? Once you learn how to build a chair, you can build chairs. And yeah, some may be better than others. Some may be ornate. Some may be, are in different styles. And you can play with those, and some might be better to your strengths than others. But you know how to build a chair. With a play, it's a little bit different. I think any writing process, I would assume it's the same with poetry or fiction. Yeah, you sort of know the carpentry, but really it's a blank page. And so there's it's a sort of leap of faith before you put a word on paper, I think. I mean, do you find that to be true?
Definitely. I have so many poems and books, especially the manuscripts, where at least 7 of them are unfinished. And I do wonder, when I do actually finish a project, I think, okay, well, am I going to be able to think of something next? Even though none of them are published, I just write for pleasure, and maybe one day something will land. But I do feel that. I always feel like, okay, it's such a wonderful creative journey to go on, to write something from start to finish. And then you think, well, what else is in my brain? And is anything else going to come out of there?
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah. And it's funny because as you're saying that, I can say to you confidently, oh, sure, things will come. But I can't say it to myself when I'm thinking it. I mean, the fact that you have, and in fact, I'd heard this in the podcast I had heard earlier. You said at the time, you said you had 6 novels that you were working on. And I thought to myself, that's amazing that you had 6 separate ideas that you've actually embarked on as a novel. So it doesn't strike me that something that you worry about too much is a lack of ideas. It's just a question of, I mean, I don't know. What would you say is your biggest obstacle as a writer?
It would definitely be time, because I get so excited about doing everything that I do, from my main career as a music therapist and podcasting, and everything. And then, of course, writing, which I love to do. But it's really just the discipline of sitting down to write when I'm so excited about everything else that I'm involved in,
Right. Yeah. No, and that's a nice problem to have, but it is a problem, right? For me, I think, and I do other things too. Like, I was gonna say I wrote the music, like step 9 isn't a musical, there's music in it, but which I wrote, which to me, I'm not I don't write. I wouldn't call myself a songwriter. I mean, I come up with tunes. There's a difference. I don't have any pretensions to think I'm this next great songwriter. But so I do have other things. But yeah, it's, for me, a lot of the fun of it is the craft of it and the challenge of it. It's like a constant. I'd say Rubik's Cube, but I hate Rubik's Cubes, but I hate them, and they hate me. But it's just a constant, because there's the fear of like, oh my God, I can't write, I don't know if I can write a play again. It's like a rediscovery every time, and a way to push yourself every time. And I find the craft of it, really, that's the thing I take most pride in, is my ability to learn the craft of it. And, the stuff that, may feel inspired may be the best part of the stuff. And it's fun to sort of be a conduit for that. But that's all I kind of am, whereas the other stuff is me figuring out, how do I make this work? How do I, go? And then the rehearsal room is great, because then if you're lucky, and I've been very lucky, I have a group of really talented, smart actors whom I trust, to say, well, this isn't quite working, or this isn't quite landing. And to me, I really get super into the nitty gritty. I will say, no, it's I'll become really insufferable in some ways. I'll say, I've written a dash in that image, you're playing an ellipsis. And it's like the music of it is wrong. And, but at the same time, I'm also very open to the idea that actors saying, well, this doesn't feel quite right in my mouth, and can we rearrange that? And so I'm always happy to try and do that whenever possible. So figuring out what I did right and what I didn't do right is very exciting for me.
Mm-hmm. I'm terribly curious, if you couldn't do playwriting for whatever reason, what would you want to explore creatively?
Well, the thing about playwriting, this is a real debit. It's a real con. Is that, when you write a novel, when you've written a novel, it's a novel. When you've written a play, you really haven't. You've written a script. The text of the play is the blueprint. It's the foundation. It's the structure. It's not the play, though. And the play is an event. And so it can be very vexing, because I know that even once I've written a play and it's getting it produced, it's very, I feel very fortunate that I've had a lot of plays produced, because it's very hard to get done. It's just the logistics and the finances and the budgets and blah, 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 and the limited space in theaters. Even if I get that done, I know that the play's only really going to be alive on those nights, and the rest of the time it's just going to be a text. So that I find, sort of heartbreaking in a way that I think novelists or short story writers, they'll be like, well, here it is, and it'll always be here. I've tried my hand at a couple of short stories, and that's something I would probably enjoy doing. I'm also a blogger, which is a great way of sort of hitting your brain a little bit and saying, well, let's approach language from a totally different aspect. And I find that really not only fun, but very helpful. Like I said, I have a blog, and I write for a couple other blogs, but I have a blog about writing, mental health, and the overlap between the two. And my last blog piece was about the fun of trying to write like someone else in a genre that you don't write. And I find that to be really helpful and fun, because I really, I clearly don't get out much. But I think that, like in the example I use, is I decided that night, so I want to write a song. I want to write a Bob Dylan lyric circa 1965. And so I did. And what's great in that sense is that he's Bob Dylan. I know I'm not going to write this Bob Dylan lyric at 10th as well as he's going to write it. Obviously, I'm not that deluded, but that to me is a freedom. I'm going to say, okay, so let me just do what I can, and let me get into his head and his rhythms and his diction, and see what I can come up with. And a lot of it isn't very good, but one or two things aren't bad. And suddenly, all of a sudden now I have a different relationship with language than I'm used to. And it sort of gets me out of that rut. And, so I've written stage directions like Tennessee Williams. Tennessee Williams stage directions are poetry. And I've tried to write sentences like Toni Morrison or F. Scott Fitzgerald, and of course they're not that good, and they're pale imitations. That I'm not going to publish those, but those are, it to me is just great, because it's like really, it just shakes you up a little bit and realizes that there are different rhythms, and there are different really great ways of talking and communicating yourself and connecting with language that aren't the ways that I've gravitated to. So it gets me out of a bit of a rut. All of this is to say, because you asked this question, I believe, last Wednesday, and I'm going to finally answer it. And it's, I think that I guess I would try to write some prose. I would try to write some prose. I am just not a good poet. I wish I were. It's in some ways, it's the skill I envy the most, because it's that compression and economizing of experience into just a few lines very often. And it's funny, in this radio play, Step 9, that I hope everyone will listen to, the central character is a poet. So there's a little envy there. And at the end of the play, she has to recite just a couple of lines of a poem, and she's supposed to be a pretty good poet. So I said to myself, if I work on it for 2 months, I can come up with 2 lines that sound that maybe they could be like a poem. And so, but like that was the hardest thing for me to do in the whole play, was when I was sweating those 2 lines. I would like show it to people. It's like, could this sound like it could be a snatch of a play? And they're like, yeah, okay, a poem. Like, yeah, okay. And so I settled for that. And in a weird way, that was the part I was proudest of, because it was so not my voice. And I also knew that if I went to 3 or 4 lines, I think the jig would be up. But so I am a big fan of really trying different things. Not in the sense that I think I'm going to write songs like Bob Dylan or write novels like F. Scott Fitzgerald, but because I think it will let me come back to my little bag of tricks linguistically and see them for what they are, and try and expand my mind a bit that way.
Excellent. I love your answer to that last question, where you like to explore and write like other artists, which leads me really well into the next question: is where do you grab some of your inspiration?
If I knew, I would go there a lot. But what I inevitably, what I think, and like I said earlier, like I'm not sure why I'm drawn to an idea, but I am. But inevitably, when I unpack it later, it's people faced with a dilemma, and when I put myself in their shoes, I inevitably have no idea what I would do. So I don't think I have anything to teach people. I don't think I have like. So I try never to be didactic, and I never go into it saying, well, I have a moral I want to impart. It's never an answer that is interesting to me. When I'm writing, it's always a question. And it's always, well, what would I do? That's really weird. Like, and again, the premise for Step 9, and I just took the premise. I didn't really follow the case of it afterwards, because I didn't want it to be a docudrama. But that moral quandary, that this poor woman is facing, and we meet the man's who's gone on, and he has a family now, and like, how is that going to affect that family? It's got to really, screw them up, to put it mildly. And so, in each of these questions, I think to myself, this is a high stakes emotional situation that I have absolutely no idea how I would tackle it. I'm fascinated to see how someone will tackle it. So inevitably, those are the sorts of things that they really sort of get me going and inspire me creatively. Because, I just, to me, that's the whole point of one of the whole points of going to theater or art, is like to be challenged in ways, in a way that's also hopefully entertaining. It's not like eating your vegetables, but yeah. So I guess in short, if I had to pin it down to something, it's the idea of like, oh gosh, I have no idea what the right answer to that would be. Let me figure it out.
Is there a play that someone else wrote that you've never had a chance to see, but you would love to see?
Oh, there's lots. There's lots. First of all, there are some classic plays that I've never seen, which I would love to see. Several Ibsen plays I haven't seen, several Chekhov plays I haven't seen. Or like her radio plays, but never live. Contemporary writers, there's a writer named Lucas Nath, who I think is really, at his worst, he's very good and very interesting. And there are several plays of his I haven't read, or seen rather, and really wish I had, and hopefully we'll have at some point. I'm also, I'm a playwright, so no one goes into playwriting to become rich. And so on that score, I've been very successful. I have not become rich. And so one of the things we were talking about earlier about New Normal Rep is making it, accessible to watch these things. So I've read tons of plays. Most plays that by contemporary writers that I'd want to read or see, I have read. As someone who's been doing it for decades, I think I maybe more than the average layperson can sort of project what it might be like on stage, but it's not the same thing. So there are many really good plays I've read that I would love to see performed. There's a writer named Gina Gianfrido. She's, I think, terrific. And I've read all of her plays and love them all, but I've only seen one of them. And so I'd love to see more of those. And for example, even older ones, like I've seen several productions, for example, Death of a Salesman. But there was a production this winter in New York that was with a predominantly African American family as the Lomans. And virtually every character in the play was African American. And I thought that was kind of a brilliant conceit. And I thought it's interesting to see how that would have changed the temperature and the tenor of what was being said. And I just thought it was great. I didn't get a chance to see it. And so I'm very upset I didn't get to see that.
In regarding plays, of course, with New Normal Rep, you've talked a little bit about Step 9, but where do you see yourself and New Normal Rep going even 2 or 3 years from now?
Well, I mean, we're very excited about our future. I mean, we're starting to build a library of stuff. And in fact, you quickly mentioned the YouTube page, which thank you for that, because the first production we did was a play of mine called Jericho, and that's up to watch for free. So everyone can watch it for free, the full production. And I don't want to give the impression that we do mostly my stuff, because we don't. It's just that because of copyright, I'm the easiest one to say, okay, that's fine. I won't make any money on that, so I'll do it. But we do, a lot of different. We want to do a lot of different plays with diverse writers, diverse group of actors and writers. But primarily, we want to do plays that sort of explore the sort of psychology and traumas, I guess, inherent in living in the modern world, in a modern America, I guess, in particular. And that can be, stories that privilege the African American experience or the Latina experience, or even white middle-aged guys like me, in our experiences and women's experiences. I mean, I was very proud of the fact that of our 4 plays, 2 of them were by writers of color, and 2 were by women, and they were direct. And I think 3 of the 4 plays were directed by women. So I love that idea of it being a nice mix where we're learning from each other and exposing it. So we're really hoping to expand that. Depends on how well I write the grants, I guess.
Seems like you have a lot of writing that you have to do, but
yeah,
obviously from the business aspect of doing what you do.
That's a big learning curve for me, and I'm not as quick a learner as I would have liked. And in fact, I say I don't get writer's block. I've had intense writer's block about the grants in some ways, which I'm getting over now, because that was a lack of confidence. That was because I don't know. And in my own, I mean, I'm in my 50s, and so it's not like I'm a child, but in my weird sort of adolescent mind, I think, well, that stuff grown-ups do. I don't understand, and I never really wanted to understand the business aspect of it. But what it has done as artistic director is it has forced me to sort of learn, which is, it's great, because you always want to be pushing yourself and challenging yourself. And I'm also very lucky, because I'm making it sound a little bit like New Normal Rep is somehow like mostly me, and by no stretch of the imagination is that the case. It's tremendously talented people from all walks of life, really helping out and frankly doing most of the heavy lifting. It's a team effort, and very much so. And so, but yes, writing that sort of stuff is, talk about trying a different style. Writing it's very challenging.
Yeah. And we talked a little bit earlier about your inspiration, but you do have a background in Shakespeare, which I love Shakespeare. So do you have a favorite? You have a favorite Shakespeare play?
I wish I had something like a really hot take on Cymbeline, but although I actually do like Cymbeline, but yeah, I gotta say, I'm sorry, it's Hamlet.
It's a good one, though.
What'd you say?
It's a good one.
It's a good one.
Yeah.
I've heard a lot of people say recently, I got into I try to stay off of not getting into fights on Twitter, because that's that's just shortening your life. But it was a discussion, and a lot of people were, quite seriously arguing, and there is a movement to say, well, we need to just retire Shakespeare for a while and make room for other plays. And no, I don't think so, because you may be tired of Shakespeare, but there's lots of people who haven't seen Shakespeare. And I think it's an essential part of sort of like being sort of, it's a great tool for learning about yourself and the world around you. I also love Othello. I do love Twelfth Night. I love Much Ado About Nothing. I mean, I was in a lot of these plays when I was as a young guy in very small theaters, but and so I have personal favorites, but I can just literally, I don't do it this often. I'm not that big a geek, but occasionally I'll just open a play, like in the middle of a play, and I'll just read like a scene, and just the language is just so unparalleled. And I used to teach high school English, and people were very intimidated by Shakespeare. And the way I taught it always was that I think it's the worst thing in the world to do is listen to high schoolers read Shakespeare, because they could be reading anything and I wouldn't understand it because they're bored. So what I would do is I'd show a scene from a really good production of something, and then we'd stop and then we'd take a look at the scene. And I would say to them, I said, yeah, the thing with Shakespeare is that like 80% of it is stuff you totally get, you totally know. But what you do, because it's human nature, is you focus on the 20%. You're like, I don't know what that means. And then like you're 3 sentences behind. And so, I always tell people, just try and you don't need to get every word. Just listen to it and you'll get the gist of it. And yeah, Shakespeare's a huge influence. And when I think about my favorite playwrights, I don't even think of him. Like he's like a separate category. He's sort of sui generis. I mean, he's nothing. It's like who's your favorite rock band? Well, it's not the Beatles, because they're the Beatles, and so like okay, now we can talk about everyone else that's a rock band. So yeah, I mean his understanding of psychology. I heard an interview with Ian McKellen today. Boy, do I sound pretentious. I heard an interview with Ian McKellen today. He was saying that that he felt that in some ways it's unfair to. He's talking about Hamlet actually. In some ways it's unfair to freight it with a lot of psychology, because of course that wasn't really a concept in Shakespeare's day. But I thought, yeah, but it wasn't a science, but Shakespeare clearly got human psychology better than anyone ever has, which is amazing to me, because at the same time, even if he hadn't gotten the human psychology better than anyone else ever has, he got the language better than anyone else ever has. It's just, when I was a younger guy and I was in a small theater company, we would do Shakespeare. We do Romeo and Juliet. And I played Mercutio, which is great, because you get all the funny lines and all the dirty jokes, and you get a great fight scene, and then you can go for lunch in the second half of the play. It's great. But I would come in and listen in the back of the theater, and these high school kids inevitably, and we had a really good Juliet, but when she says, "Come give me my Romeo, when he shall die, take him and cut him out into little stars, and he shall make the face of heaven so fine that all the world will be in love with night and pay no worship to the garish sun." Dead silence in the audience, because they got it. And I mean, the language is music. It's some of the most beautiful music ever written. When he shall die, what an interesting mind. Like she's talking about the great love of her life, and then she goes to when he dies, and like who else would go there? Take him and cut him out into little stars, and he shall make the face of heaven so fine that all the world will be in love with night and pay no worship. Perfect word, to the garish sun. So yeah, I mean, like it just sinks into even these jaded high schoolers' silence on that part. So yeah, I'm sorry, we've been talking about Shakespeare for a long time, but I could talk about him all night.
That's okay. No, Shakespeare is one of my personal favorites.
What's your favorite play?
I took a whole class on him in college, and in terms of a favorite play, I've always been really drawn to the darker ones that he wrote, his tragedies for sure. Hamlet and Macbeth are definitely tops up there.
Sure. And such different plays too, right? Because Hamlet is all over the place. It's more of like a novel in the sense that he goes off on all these tangents, which is not really what technical good playwriting is, but turns out Hamlet's a good play anyway. Whereas Macbeth is streamlined. There's no subplot, which is very unusual, and it's over in 2 hours. And but again, and the language and the psychology is unmatched. And even some of his other plays, his so-called problem plays at the end, like Winter's Tale, which is a very strange play. It's this weird dark tragedy, then this wacky romp, and then it's this heartbreaking last act. And so anyway, I mean, I guess I'm here to give you the hot take that Shakespeare was good. So I hope that doesn't start a controversy, but Shakespeare was good.
I'm curious, what are your thoughts on Oscar Wilde?
Oh, yeah. Do we have another 5 hours for Oscar Wilde? Yeah. Yeah, apparently when he spoke, people said he spoke like he wrote. It sounded the sentences came out as if they had been gone through several drafts. My two favorite people to quote inevitably are Wilde and Parker, Dorothy Parker. And but I mean, Wilde's a great example too. And believe me, I'm not comparing my stuff to Oscar Wilde's, but Oscar Wilde's a great example of someone who says things that are immensely witty, but filled with great and sometimes very sorrowful truths. You and the maybe the most famous of one of that particular ilk is the great one where he says, we're all in the gutter, but some of us are looking up at the stars. There's such poetry and pathos in that, and then there's also, I mean, something like the importance of being earnest, where is just wit and just fun and just clearly just such a the Germans must have a word for this, but just language joy. They're writers that I just get language joy out of, and Oscar Wilde is as good as anyone ever at that, I think. And did you so I mean, I'm guessing you like Wilde too.
Oh yes, he's my favorite.
He's your
Well, him
favorite.
him and Shakespeare are like tied
Yeah.
for number one. They're duking it
Yeah.
out.
Yeah, duking it out.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously his life is tragic too, and he was capable of writing. I mean, Ballad of Reading Gaol is very scathing and heartbreaking and all these things at the same time. But he just has tremendous wit, and even in the face of great bleakness, like when he's dying in his bed in Paris, and he's looking at this terrible wallpaper, and he says, between the wallpaper and me, one of us has to go. The day before he died. So he's, what a tragic life he had, and it's a shame to think of what he might have been. Not that what he gave us isn't more than ample, but I mean, it's that sort of shaved to a fine needlepoint wit. Wonderful.
Yeah. I realize we got off a bit on a tangent, but in regards to the great masters of the olden days, do you carry any of those things with you into your writing and your acting?
Oh gosh. Well, I mean, I not consciously, right? I mean, I do. Well, first of all, because I mean, inevitably, you write how you write. But I mean, I'm sure inevitably the answer to that is yes, although I couldn't tell you where or how. I certainly don't think, what would Shakespeare do here? Because, because the answer would be, he'd write something much better than you're about to write. So that doesn't help me much. But they influence me. I mean, like, for example, Tom Stoppard is another great example of a tremendous wit, and love his stuff. And I also love Arthur Miller, who was not witty, but profound and Shakespearean in scope in some ways, in some of his plays. But I find that I don't sound like them, I don't even sound like pale imitations of them. I think it's too hard. I think, especially as you get older, I mean, you're a lot younger than I am. And so as an old man, let me tell you that I think, eventually, your heart and your brain and your soul and all those things, they become impenetrably knotted. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I don't mean knotted as in screwed up, although, opinions vary, but knotted in the sense that you can't ever hope to untangle it. You can't untangle all these things. The influences have been so prevalent, but woven into everything else that, that I can't anyway. It's arrogant of me to say that you can't, but I can't unpack what I've learned from him or her, in any particular way. I'm just glad I get to read them.
Mm-hmm. We're going to switch gears, and I was wondering, what are some of the best resources, whether it's a book or courses or websites or workshops, that you could recommend someone who wants to go into your line of work?
Well, first one that comes to mind is go to my website, and I have coaching. I do coaching. So obviously that's the premier source. But at jackcanforwriter.com, outside of that, in all seriousness, you can't beat Aristotle's Poetics. I mean, people have tried, but it's his views on science and medicine turned out to be pretty wacky and off. But his views on what makes a good piece of dramatic writing are pretty spot on. For me, the answer is in doing it, just doing it and doing it and doing it, and not doing, and also it sounds like a simplistic answer, and I guess it is a simplistic answer. You want to be constantly writing, and you want to be constantly reading. Reading all the plays you can get your hands on, watching all the plays you can get your hands on, even the bad ones. The bad ones can be at least as instructive as the good ones. And don't stick to just reading plays. Read novels, read biographies, read histories. I mean, I just read anything you can get your hands on, because if you're writing fiction, or you're writing, plays or screenplays, everything is source material. The broader your canvas can be, and your palette can be, and I'm getting lost in art metaphors. I shouldn't have gone down that road. The more you think, the more things you have to choose from. I mean, it's, there's one of the great things about life, right? And it's the paradox. It's so heartbreaking and so wonderful that you're never going to be able to read anything like all the great books that have been written. But, find what you love to write, work on that. And, as the great line from Beckett, always try, always fail, try again, fail better. And that's kind of how I feel, I'm doing it. And I think that's what most people do, is, and not to be, that sounds cynical and discouraging, and it's not really. To me, it's a freedom, right? That Shakespeare, for example, wrote or co-wrote Two Noble Kinsmen or Timon of Athens. That's so liberating, because even Shakespeare could write plays that aren't great. And at the same time, like when you sit down to write a novel, hopefully you're thinking, well, I want to write a novel as good as Toni Morrison's. And that should be your goal. And you should be okay with the fact that you're not going to, you know what I mean? And the more you do it, the better you'll get. There's I think Ira Glass pointed out that people who are artists are sometimes frustrated when they're young, because they have really great taste. And then they try and create something, and they know, well, this isn't nearly as good as the stuff that I've been reading and hearing. And yet I know I can do it, but why aren't I doing it? And because it does take, I don't know that Malcolm Gladwell is right exactly, and you need 10,000 hours necessarily, but you need practice. You need to figure out what to do. And if you can do it quickly, then God bless you. So I think that's the main resource. I mean, to me, the main resource is, your local library and your computer. And that's it. Just absorb yourself in culture, and then as much news as you can bear to watch while keeping your sanity. And reading some books on psychology, reading books on history, all that stuff. And check out my website and coaching. And obviously between that, you're set. No, but all joking aside, that would be my advice. I'm not a big believer in how-to manuals. There's a famous one, and I have to admit, I haven't read it, and so I can't disparage it. I'm not trying to. People swear by it. Is like rescuing. The name of the book is Rescue the Cat or something. It's a screenplay book, and it basically tells you, and it breaks it down into beats. And all screenplays have these beats, and blah 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 blah. And there are great writers who swear by it. So who am I? But to me, just to me, it would feel a lot like painting by numbers. That's teaching you how to write the way everyone else has written. And it's a balance, right? Because, if you want to write for yourself, you're under no obligation to follow any rules. But I do believe that the minute you send a script out or a manuscript out for someone else to read, I believe you have an obligation to make it entertaining, and to make it coherent, and to make it something that the audience or the reader wants to read. That doesn't mean it has to be light or compromised or ersatz in any way, but it can't just be about you. It can't be about you. That's what you have journals for. Putting a novel out is a little bit hubristic, and God knows writing a play is incredibly hubristic, because I'm saying I want a lot of people to learn my lines, and then I'm going to charge people money to come and sit and be quiet for 2 hours and listen to what I'm having to say. That's obviously not the way I really think about it, but when you step back, it's like, wow, that's a little gutsy. So I think it would be even worse if the least I can do is say, well, let me try and entertain you while you're here,
What stereotypes do you hope to break with your work, or that you hope you've broken with your work?
Well, stereotypes. Well, let me drill down on that a little bit with you. Do you have any particular sense of stereotypes? Like, what areas of stereotypes do you think?
Just anything that people may think about plays.
Well, I mean, that presupposes people think about plays, but um, assuming that what I like to do in my plays, if I'm doing them well, or at least try to do them, is I want to tell a story that you don't need to be a playgoer to enjoy. But at the same time, I don't want it to be a TV script, although I love writing TV scripts and TV is great writing. I want it. I want to lean into the language more because theater plays privileged language more. And if with any luck, the audience member will meet me halfway, and if we're lucky, we can get into something that's more informed by language and powerful psychological dynamics. That is in no way, I hope, pompous and very much navel gazing and like wearing black and smoking cigarettes and a beret. I mean, they're not smoking the beret, but I mean they're wearing the beret. That sort of thing I have I want to point out that this is actually something that's really great. And it doesn't have, you don't have to feel uneducated or you don't have to feel preached to. Those are the two things I really don't like in plays. I'm really trying my very best as a writer to avoid.
So it sounds like you're trying to break down the societal barriers that some people have put up in the past about attending plays and things.
Maybe. I mean, I never thought about it this way, but I like the way you phrase that, and I'll probably be stealing that. I do think this. It's weird because I grew up on Long Island. I grew up like 45 minutes from the theatrical center of the world. Never saw plays growing up. Never saw plays growing up. My parents, both very educated, smart people, never saw plays. It just wasn't on our radar, and it's really not on most people's radars. And so I came to I discovered it on my own in college, and realizing, oh my God, this is really special and this is great. And if you can get past the one man Beckett the musical, and get those sorts of things out of the way, there's really something rich and informative to it and fun that you may not have been aware of. And I don't mean fun in a sort of flippant, glib way. I mean, in entertaining. To me, King Lear is immensely entertaining. Not a lot of laughs, right? But I mean, so there's different types of entertainment. And so I guess in a way, and I hadn't thought of it before, but you've mentioned it, because I guess I'm writing for someone who would like the sort of stuff I like. And so I am a playwright that does not try to buy into that sort of downtown, oh my God. There are pictures, I won't name the playwright, but there's a well-known playwright. And if you look at pictures of his plays, when they have the author's picture in the background, he always has his hand on his forehead, and he's always like, it's just so hard being me, and the pain I feel on your behalf. I torture myself so you may have a happy life. That kind of thing that I really have little patience for. And I was at a gathering recently, and this isn't a reflection on the person at all. Perfectly good writer, and I didn't meet him, but I'm sure he's a perfectly nice guy. But I said to my friend, I said, boy, if you ordered on Amazon, I want a life-size playwright, and they send you the box and it came out of it, that's exactly what it would look like, And so, and I think for some people, who may not be inclined to do that, they're like, oh, this isn't what I want to spend time with. And because it seems very self-aggrandizing and very satisfied with itself in a lot of ways. And I would love to break down that barrier.
Excellent. Well, one last question before we go, which is, in your own words, what does living a creative life mean to you?
Off the top of my head, first draft, I would say that it is a life in which you are, as best as you can, always making an effort to be open to observing what's around you and to taking that and learning from it. And it doesn't necessarily mean writing or painting. It can be the way you engage in your relationships. I think that, that's where a lot of times the most creativity is is demanded. And learning about yourself, I think David Bowie said, growing up should, I'm paraphrasing here, growing up should be ideally where you become who you really are. And I think it takes a lot of creativity, and it takes a lot of patience and forgiveness and of yourself and of others. I think that if we could all be that creative, then I think we'd be in great shape.
Excellent. Do you have any other parting words for our listeners?
Just that I would, this is just disgusting self-promotion. I would urge you to check out our website, www.newnormalrep.org, and also our YouTube page, which is New Normal Rep, which has lots of stuff on it. It has a full-length play that I hope you enjoy. It also has some small 10-minute plays. It even has a sketch or two, and it's all free. And also hope you give Step 9 a listen, and and pass the word on if you like it.
Sounds good. Thank you. Listeners, please check the show notes for all of the links that Jack mentioned, as well as his social media handles, so that you can connect, learn, and enjoy his plays. And as always, thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to the podcast. Like the show? Have a question? Stop by the Facebook and Instagram pages. Links are in the show notes, or search for Creative Piecemeal Podcast on social media and click follow for all the latest.